Nick Bockwinkel settles into the AWA shortly before you do, and then he's teamed up with Ray Stevens and one of the most legendary tag teams of all time. People say that they were possibly the greatest tag team of all time. What did you make of that pairing?
Yeah, we're great, like Ray and Pat, Ray and Nick, Ray and Pat were the same. Anybody they both had the idea, they both had the concept. They get with they drew, with the Crusher and Bruiser. A couple 2-3 years they got out of that, and all they were rag dolls. No high spots. The Bruiser wasn't selling. If the Bruiser wasn't selling, the Crusher wasn't selling. Just they run them together from here, run them together from there. Blind him for a second, and then he comes back and does something else to you. This just yeah. But the guys that they did work with, like Pat and Ray, they get the heat, the hair, and the motions and the quickness and the timing. It's flawless. They're two of the greatest workers. Period. Bach and Stevens, Bach and Pat, Bach and Pat, Bach and Stevens, Bach and Ray and Pat. Everyone. They're all had similarities. Nobody was in a rush. Everybody had a clear thought, a clear mind. Nobody was trying to outdo the other guy, or be better, or be better, or be any than the other. And working together as a team, simply.
Yeah. When I'm trying to think. I think it was in 1972. It may have been earlier, but you do your first singles match with Nick. And you've already said in the previous podcast that Nick Bockwinkel was one of your absolute favourites, probably before you even got into the business. It's that sort of intimidation factor where you see somebody on TV and you respect them entirely for their work. Does that sort of like negatively affect you, or do you bring your own game up to match theirs, or like is there an intimidation factor?
No, you know what you're presenting. You know it's coming down. You know what you're there for. It's just, well, I suppose there's a type of, there's a you recognize, that this guy is, like my first match in Hawaii was with King Curtis, ever. First time it was a prelim to a battle royal, and Curtis put me over in about 12 count out, about 12 minutes. Came back to the battle royal. Oh, you want to stay here? And I was in Hawaii for the next 8 months, and then on to AWA. So yeah, intimidation, I suppose. So I've been told by other guys, people that work with me on, having the shoe on the other foot, have seemed less than overamped, and then there's the guys that have been overamped. So I guess it all depends on the individual. There's guys been, I'm working with Muraco, blah blah blah, or like, well, I was working with Nick, or Curtis or somebody like that. But you trust you trust their experience and their leadership.
Yeah, you settle in. You settle in quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ray Stevens, always cited as one of the greatest of all time, and I'm sure you'll concur with that. I mean, you already did on a previous podcast, in fact.
Yeah, right.
You've got to give us a great Ray Stevens story from behind the scenes, because I've heard a couple, they all either always involve orgies or riding a bike naked down the streets or whatever else it could be. Have you got any amusing anecdotes?
Well, Modesto was I wasn't there. I was, but Modesto was a far, one of the deserts, the Sacramento, Modesto, Fresno, out in the desert there, and that valley, up the Wine Valley, in Northern California. So Pat used to drive. I guess Ray lived in San Francisco or the city, or Hayward or something like that as well, Oakland, Hayward, something. But they went the same way. Going back, and Pat would leave, and Ray would get in back of him and push and bang his car and push his car from the back. That's I didn't think in them when I went through to think of any stories, but Ray was like you say, the naked on the bikes and driving and all that stuff. He was a character. Never paid income tax. He didn't until they finally got him at the end, and he didn't give a damn. Like I said, that's the difference between Ray and Pat. His work was so similar. And Ray just didn't give a rip. Just go in there, and he'd been wrestling, and they both started wrestling in their early teens, and just go and things would just work out where Pat would think about, would be conscious, and that was the only difference, really.
And Pat paid his taxes. That was the other difference.
Yeah.
And we'd be remiss without mentioning Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens without mentioning Bobby Heenan. This must be the first place you met Bobby.
Yeah, but I did never that well. He was mostly no. I knew him, but Air Host Hotel after the Masters in Chicago, and a couple of times. But he was with at that time he was with Lanza and Big Jack Mulligan in Indy. He was with the Bruiser. He started with the Bruiser. I think Barnett was the one that he was selling programs or something for Barnett. But that was promoting, and and the Bruiser found him, and the Bruiser abused him for a couple of years, and using the manager and stuff, and he turned into the great that he was.
Was he actually a manager first or a wrestler first? Because there's always conflicting information on that one.
I don't know. Oh, I'm sure probably manager. Because probably wrestler, because they're not going to let. Well, they are. Well, I don't know now. Back in those days, I don't know. Their little Wild Red Berry and Ernie Roth, and a couple of those little guys were managed. They were the managers. So possibly could have started. I don't know. I don't know. But I would think him as well as he took bumps and as good a worker as he was, probably started as a worker, as a wrestler. He's a small, skinny guy.
Do you remember Bobby's brother Guy Heenan?
No.
Never mind then. Okay, we'll move on from.
Where was he? Was that Indianapolis or?
Yeah, it probably was. He was Guy Mitchell apparently, but he had a fake brother that he wrestled with on occasion.
Oh, Guy Mitchell. Yeah, I'm kind of heavy set.
Yeah.
Mustache. Yeah, he was. I remember him as Guy Mitchell. I didn't know. I didn't know him as Bobby's brother. But he was around a few. Maybe it wasn't until after that he. I don't know. Maybe before that, before he became manager for the two Jacks. I don't know.
Could have been.
I didn't know that they were brothers. Yeah. Wrestling brothers.
Wrestling brothers.
Actually, those are wrestling brothers.